The NYIC is a policy and advocacy organization that has over 200 members across the state of New York, from Buffalo down to Brooklyn, all the way to the East End and Long Island. Thank you for joining us this morning and coming to hear from our amazing members who are doing the work on the ground and continue to fight for our communities. Before we start, we must acknowledge the riot we witnessed in Washington. A mob of white supremacists, Proud Boys, MAGA supporters rioted and stormed through our Capitol in a horrific and futile attempt to overturn the will of the majority of American voters at the behest of a president trying to desperately cling to power at any cost. But before they threw their tantrum, voters in Georgia, including many immigrant and BIPOC voters, Black, Indigenous, and people of color voters, delivered the U.S. Senate to the Democratic Party. We saw an enormous amount of voters come out for the first time, as well as drive voter turnout in Georgia across the state, where now we have two new U.S. senators, Senator Reverend Warnock, as well as Senator Ossoff, coming into the Senate in the next couple of weeks. Communities and us have done our part. Now it's time for the Democratic Party to make good on their promises and undo Trump's legacy on immigration and fix a system that has been broken for decades. But what does this actually mean? Experts agree that undoing Trump's legacy could take years. What can immigrant New Yorkers expect from this administration, and what do communities need? That's what we will tackle today. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to all of the amazing panelists who I'll introduce as they speak. First up, I'd like to introduce our amazing Anu Joshi, the New York Immigration Coalition's Vice President of Policy.
Thanks so much, Murad, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. As Murad said, my name is Anu Joshi, and I'm the Vice President of Policy at the New York Immigration Coalition. As the country prepares to move forward past the policies of xenophobia and hatred that have gripped us for the last 4 years and were horrifyingly on display this week, but we are prepared to move forward. Those same policies were soundly rejected by our nation on Election Day in November and just this past Tuesday in Georgia. Now is the time to center those most directly impacted by the immigration system. Now is the time to address the policies that have caused untold suffering, especially under the last 4 years of Trump's cruel immigration policies and practices, in order to create the roadmap to unity and freedom with a pathway to citizenship. President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris made bold promises for relief for our families on day one of their administration. They must use the authority of the executive branch to initiate big and bold immigration executive actions that will, 1, rescind or reverse every harmful Trump executive order and rule affecting immigrants and refugees, and 2, proactively and affirmatively dismantle the enforcement machinery, starting with an immediate moratorium on deportation and all immigration enforcement, including arrests and detention. Once this moratorium on deportations and interior enforcement is in place, the new administration must go further. They must create a deportation protection program for the millions of our families that are currently living in fear. They must significantly reduce the backlog of removal cases pending before the immigration courts. They must end the state and local entanglements between our criminal legal system and our immigration enforcement system. And they must dramatically shrink the immigration detention system. We are ready and prepared to hold this administration accountable to the commitments they have already made to implement this moratorium on deportations, to restore DACA and TPS, temporary protected status, to the millions that should be covered, to rescind the racist and harmful Muslim ban, African ban, and other travel bans, and the inhumane Remain in Mexico policy and other threats to our asylum system, rescind the racist and classist public charge rule, and introduce an expansive legalization bill. We expect any immigration legalization bill proposed by the incoming Biden-Harris administration to be inclusive without any of the so-called trade-offs we've seen in the past. We expect this bill to put the 11 million undocumented immigrants in our communities on a road to citizenship. With the momentum of the election and the mandate that it has provided for unity and change, members of Congress also have a critical role to play in shaping the future of immigration in this country. We expect our New Yorkers here who are in Congress, including and especially our senior senator from New York and incoming Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, to use every possible lever within their legislative power to pass solutions that center the lives of those directly impacted and put immigrant communities on the roadmap to unity and freedom. Our vision for an immigration system will be introduced in the 117th Congress any day now as the Roadmap to Freedom. The Roadmap to Freedom is a visionary policy platform that embodies affirmative values and principles by which we will measure any immigration proposal that's put forward either by the administration or a member of Congress. The roadmap is rooted in the voices of hundreds of member organizations who represent hundreds of thousands of immigrant families across the country. Immigrants and communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic while working the essential jobs to keep our country running. Congress must center our people in all of the solutions it champions, from economic relief and recovery to legalization to government funding, and we are prepared to put in the work. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Anu. And thank you for laying out our campaign that we anticipate will really shake up Washington and ensure that we make Senator Schumer our champion in this coming session. Next up, I'd like to introduce Manuel Castro, the executive director of the new Immigrant Community Empowerment. Manny will touch upon his experience and the amazing work that NYIC has been doing with frontline workers during the pandemic and this current recession. Over to you, Manny.
Thank you, Murad, and thank you, NYIC, for putting this together. I think it's a really critical moment to talk about this. NYIC is a community-based organization that supports and organizes undocumented workers, like day laborers, food delivery workers, and domestic workers, many living through this pandemic with no support from any level of government. Let me repeat that, from any level of government. So while we're here focusing on the federal government, I want to make sure everyone understands that all levels of government has let us down. But I want to be clear and direct as possible about the issue at hand. Our community is sick and tired of the excuses and delays when it comes to immigration reform. Our community cannot wait 100 days. Our community cannot wait 30 days. So we expect this administration to be ready on day one to introduce immigration reform that is inclusive of all communities suffering through this pandemic. No arbitrary cutoff dates, no one left out, because our communities are sick and tired of waiting. In this time, Democrats must come through for our community. Because of their failure to pass immigration reform a decade ago, hundreds and thousands of families have been separated. Children have been put in cages, and millions are living through a historic pandemic with no support. Many are dying, are sick, and are going hungry. All this as a result of the Democrats' failure to pass immigration reform when they had a chance in 2009. So now we expect them to do better and finally prioritize our communities. And you know what? Don't tell us that you need time to work on legislation, because you have been working on this for decades. And if you need a bill, we have one for you. NYIC has one for you. So no more excuses and no more delays. And let me say one more thing. Dreamers like myself, whose parents and siblings are still undocumented, whose family has given so much to this country, and now see our community suffering through this pandemic with no support from any level of government, we've learned a lot over these past couple of years. And so I have to tell you, we're ready to fight for our families. We're ready to fight for our communities like never before. No more delays, no more excuses. Thank you, Moran. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you for that powerful testimony. I'd like to introduce and bring up next Uraldi Papaki, who is a DACA eligible immigrant schools high school student, to share her story and talk about her family's experience.
Thank you for having me here today. My name is Uraldi Papaki. I was born in Puebla, Mexico, and came to the United States when I was a year old. My family is part of I'm School family program. I have been living in this country for 15 years and I am a high school student. My dream is to travel and become an EMT to give emergency medical treatments. One of the most important things in my life is my family, who all have different immigration statutes. My family came to this country to start over and have better opportunities. The past 4 years have been really difficult. I was not able to apply to DACA since they were not taking in new applicants. My family was scared to see that we could be separated. My family were strong and made emergency plans, but this was really difficult to see. I am now able to apply for DACA as a new applicant. This this changed my life. Having DACA means that I can support my family more. I can get closer to my dreams of traveling and being an EMT. I have learned so much from helping my sister who has special needs that I want to help others in need. I won't be afraid to be separated from my family which will help me finish high school and pursue my dreams. Finally, I would like to know where I came from. With DACA, I will be able to visit Mexico to see my family members again. Many who are sick and are getting old, especially my grandma. While DACA will create many opportunities for me, I know that my parents and thousands of other immigrants in New York also need support. This new president must support our immigrants community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here today with us. It's so amazing to hear your story and your voice, and I appreciate you advocating on behalf of yourself and your family. Thank you. I'd like to bring up next Juliana Perez Calle, the Rapid Response Staff Attorney at Unlocal, to talk about some of the top legal issues faced by populations Unlocal works with and has experienced during the Trump administration.
Hello, everyone. Juliana Perez Calle. I'm one of the lucky few that can say that I am formally undocumented, formally documented. I'm a staff attorney with the Rapid Response Legal Collaborative. I spend most of my days helping immigrants at the end stage of their immigration process. So they have removal orders, they're detained, or facing imminent deportation, often with little to no legal relief. And I'm often faced with confronting the limit of our immigration laws and delivering bad news and helping individuals and their families process the end stage of their life in the US, or of their immigration case. Having that said, we are, as we all know, on the cusp of being able to achieve really transformative change that can provide a real opportunity for many of our clients, many immigrants. But we do have a very long way for the masses in general to understand the dignity inherent in immigrants who are also part of we the people and also have constitutionally protected civil rights to life, liberty, health, and wellness. And as we work towards building this American ethos in this post-COVID world, I'd like to focus today, just my part to focus on really working on helping the public understand what we mean when we say abolish ICE. So when we say abolish ICE, we're talking about ending the practice of imprisoning people in already desperate circumstances during a pandemic. We are talking about ending the practice of indefinite detention, especially now with COVID, where people are literally left languishing for years in jails and detention centers because, for example, they cannot be deported to their country of origin because we're in this post-COVID world, and certain countries are not receptive to the US. We're talking about ending the practice of private prisons that are primarily financed by ICE and traded in the stock market. We're talking about ending the practice of ICE targeting New York families who are the fabric of this city and oftentimes currently grieving loss, being part of the epicenter of this pandemic. We're talking about stopping the deportation pipeline that transfers people from the criminal legal system straight into the hands of ICE. We're talking about ending the practice of anxiety and trauma-inducing practices of ICE surveillance on everyday community members who are just trying to live and work, especially during this time where they're taking care of loved ones. And we're calling on the incoming majority leader-elect Chuck Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, and President-elect Biden to dismantle ICE and the entire deportation machine to reflect the real life and essential public health needs of our time. We also call for an immediate moratorium on all ICE enforcement, deportations, and detentions. And we're calling for all immigrant detainees to be released immediately and for ICE to suspend all surveillance of our communities. Moving forward into this new era of recovery will necessitate dismantling these oppressive, racist, and carceral systems that keep our communities from the health and wellness and their constitutionally protected civil rights.
Thank you so much, Juliana. We've seen the terror that ICE has unleashed on our communities and continual violence towards and separating families across the state of New York. And I appreciate you sharing your words and actually defining what we mean when we say we'd like to undo what this agency has done. I'd like to ask George Tarr up from African Refuge as our next speaker to talk about the importance of temporary protected status and specifically for the communities that African Refuge works with and for, and touch on the fear created by the Trump administration and their threats against TPS. George?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is George Tarr. I work for AR Inc., also known as African Refuge. We are a small nonprofit based on community-based organization in Staten Island, New York. We pretty much provide comprehensive services for the people who live in Park Hill, but also in other areas of Staten Island as well. Most of the people who do live in this community are either one, undocumented, or pretty much have TPS status. When we first came to this country, we pretty much had no status as well. We came as refugees and we were resettled in Staten Island, New York, where there's a huge West African population. And most of those people are one, either undocumented or have TPS, and then they later on moved to green card holder, which I am currently. I am a current green card holder. And then later on, you apply for green card or citizenship. Once you get your green card, then the next step is citizenship. which I'm currently in the process of applying for citizenship. TPS is important because it provides some sort of safe haven for those people who are fleeing any sorts of conflict, whether gang violence or civil war, civil unrest, or whatsoever situation that might be going on in a native-born country. Especially since CPS was established in the 1990s, it have provided some sort of safe haven for almost 400,000 plus people who are fleeing, some sort of conflict or some sort of whatsoever situation that might be going on in the country. So TPS kind of provide that sort of safe haven for them. Well, the problem with TPS is that it does not provide a lot of resources for people who are, TPS holder. So the benefit that a lot of citizen or green card holder might get, a person who have TPS might not be able to get that same sort of benefit. As a great example was recently when we actually won our ECAP, Emergency Cash Assistance from New York Coalition. And a lot of people who had TPS didn't want us to, get signing up for the program, for the Emergency Cash Assistance program, because they were afraid that it would associate with the government, and that if the name was to be in some sort of end up in the system, there's a possibility they would lose their status, and there's a possibility they might get deported. So a lot of people were hesitant towards, getting that type of assistance. It's the same thing with the upcoming vaccine. A lot of people in the community, they are afraid that if they do sign up to get the vaccine, the government might come after them. And that's the type of fear that the Trump administration have created for a lot of people who hold TPS status. So those people, they don't want to, at this time, they don't want to be associated with any type of help that might be coming from any type of nonprofit organization, because they feel there's some sort of distrust with the current administration, and that if their status as a TPS holder expire, they might get deported. And that's one thing. TPS is only about 6 to 18 months. So once your TPS expires, there's a possibility you might not get renewed, or you might get deported back to a country that you actually fled due to certain circumstances that happen, certain events that occur in that country. So for a lot of TPS holders, their future is always uncertain. It's the same as being stateless, but in terms of being stateless, is a little better than being a stateless person, because as a TPS holder, you always have a country to go back to. But living in a country that provides some sort of safe haven, you don't get a lot of benefit. Some people are even afraid to go for medical checkup. So there's a lot of issues with being a TPS holder. Your future is always uncertain.
Thank you, George. I appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for sharing your community and your story, and those of the folks on Staten Island. It's greatly appreciated. I'd like to introduce next up Vanessa Luna, who's the co-founder and chief program officer at Schools. We've worked with Vanessa for many years, and we're excited that she was able to join us today. And we'd like for her to share about the Dreamer population that the school works with, as well as the importance of the reinstatement and expansion of the DACA program for New York students across the state.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I am honored to be here with you all representing IM schools. We work with and for our undocumented community in New York City public schools. I want to highlight and shout out Yeraldi for sharing her story. She's one of our wonderful students and really appreciate her and her power. I want to acknowledge that the reality of this Biden administration and the Senate majority, as was mentioned, is only possible because of the relentless work and efforts of Black, Indigenous people of color. As such, we have a responsibility to hold this administration accountable for the promises that they have made, because at this moment, too many lives are at stake. And immigration policy deeply impacts our schools and our classrooms. These two things are not disconnected. Through our work in New York City public schools, I have witnessed the ongoing need to not only reinstate DACA, but also expand the program and provide a pathway to citizenship for all in our immigrant community. The reinstatement of DACA can be an initial first step. Now, I know that this is life-changing for potential new applicants like Yeraldi, who many are students in high schools and have been waiting for some type of relief for many years, who with DACA now are able to access jobs or even potential internships previously closed to them due to a simple lack of a social security number. This can impact their career trajectory as a result of this 2-year work permit, and most importantly, be a protection from deportation. DACA will also impact immigrant parents, especially those in elementary school who are current DACA recipients themselves. They are part of a mixed status family potentially with children who are a part of our schools and are citizens or have different types of immigration status. It will also impact documented educators. There are teachers in this moment in New York public schools that are part of our school system that are undocumented, that are teaching in the most difficult of circumstances in the middle of a pandemic, and deserve not only for this program to be reinstated, but also a pathway to citizenship. Now, I know the impact of DACA firsthand because I was someone who was actually a former DACA recipient. I was undocumented for 20 years. I grew up undocumented here and maneuvered the K-12 system, went to college, pre-New York DREAM Act, and I'm incredibly thankful for the work that has happened for New York to be this space where our students are able to have access to greater resources. But there's more work to be done. DACA, while it allowed me to become a teacher, to co-found a nonprofit that now works with schools, and to contribute to a city that I love and grew up in, it is also really important for us to think about those who are not eligible for this. Now, the reinstatement and expansion of DACA is critical, but it is a Band-Aid, right? I can't help but think of our immigrant youth, of our immigrant parents and family members who do not qualify for the program. Many are not eligible due to a matter of years, days, preventing them from accessing life-changing relief. But they remain hopeful and they remain powerful in ways that I don't think we emphasize enough. I think it's really important for us to know that our students and families are still showing up. They're showing up in remote learning. They're showing up in being frontline workers in this city, in this state, and in this country. As such, we must ensure that everyone in our immigrant community is treated with dignity, with respect, and with humanity. This will not only impact our immigration system, but also our schools. Holding this administration accountable for their promises is only the beginning of this transformational work. Thank you all for having me here, and let's get to work.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And thank you for sharing your story, but also the story of your students and the students who've been left out from the program, and talking about why we need a comprehensive approach to ensuring that all of our communities are able to move forward in life and be able to thrive here. Next up, I'd like to bring up Afaf Nasher, the Executive Director of CARE New York. And we've worked very extensively with CARE here in New York, but also in DC with regards to the Muslim ban. I'd like for you to share, Afaf, just about the damage of the Muslim ban and provide some context to its evolution, and also touch on why the Muslim ban must be rescinded ASAP.
Thank you so much, Brother Murad. Good morning, everyone. Salam alaikum, greetings of peace. CARE New York is the New York chapter for the Council on American Islamic Relations. We're a civil rights organization that protects civil rights for Muslims throughout New York State. And as Brother Murad knows, because immigration has become so laden with discrimination, it's become a core part of CARE New York's work. And when it comes to the Muslim ban, my brothers and my sisters, the impact has been profoundly inhumane, profoundly immoral, and profoundly unjust. And this is because CARE New York believes policies are not empty political rhetoric. Rather, they are not lifeless words, but are living and breathing through those that are impacted. Mothers have been unable to reunite with their children. Husbands have been unable to build lives with their wives. Economic resources have been depleted as breadwinners try to support families abroad. The ability to attend a funeral of a dying parent or to deliver life-saving opportunities and medicine to those that are sick, family members of US citizens, have been inhumanely denied. And at the root of all this is racism, Islamophobia, and xenophobia. And it's time, my fellow coalition members and members of the press, it is time to bury the Muslim ban, the African ban, and all the racist policies, and hopefully never again be revisited. This requires, of course, that President-elect Biden and his administration live up to his promises and his words to uphold equality and to do so swiftly on day one, as he's promised. He must repeal the Muslim ban. He has to work with Congress to adopt the No Ban Act, and he has to repeal other discriminatory policies like VWP, the Visa Waiver Program. And make no mistake, these are not the only discriminatory immigration policies. There is a lot of work to be done. A lot of damage needs to be repaired to the Muslim community and to our fellow immigrant communities. Much of this work is outlined in CARE's publication entitled The First 100 Days, from CVE to the Muslim and African bans to the Quiet Skies program, and so many other programs that have targeted an assault on the Muslim immigrant community and immigrants of color. The injuries have been vast and they have to stop now. Americans of all walks of life are demanding change, and the age of political accountability is upon us. So CARE New York stands in solidarity with New York Immigration Coalition, with our coalition members, with our immigrant advocates, in demanding that the U.S. live up to its promises of once again becoming a beacon of hope for all immigrants, and in recognizing that immigrants are a vibrant pulse to the strength of our nation. Thank you, Brother Murad. We look forward to working with you once again.
Thank you, sister. And thank you for sharing the impacts, not just on the Muslim community, but also the African ban and all other bans that need to be rescinded on day one. I'd like to bring up Zaid Naji, the co-founder of the American Merchants Association, to talk about how he's been impacted and the community's been impacted at large with the Muslim ban.
Thank you, Murad, and thank you, New York Coalition, and thank you, everyone, for continuing to allow us to highlight the pain of my family and the pain for our community as a whole. And thank you for always being with us through the dark days that we went through during the Trump administration. Before I go through my personal story, I want to state that this is not unique to me or to a few family from our community. This is the un-American racist actions of the Trump administration have touched every Yemeni American home. And one only needs to visit the nearest bodega to see the extent of the damage. In fact, we have a Yemeni American committed suicide after he could not, in the state of Louisiana, after he couldn't bear the many different consequences of his family being in Djibouti while he's here working in current cost. We also have family separation, even though it's not in the traditional way. It didn't happen here at the border. It happened at airports across different countries, as Yemeni Americans or the State Department gave visa to some family members while the mom will not have it. And also store owners, as everybody knows that our community consists of store owners. They are in the service industry. They have to leave their businesses almost every month to go visit the many different homes that they have to open across the region that surrounds Yemen, being that there is no U.S. consulate in Yemen. So as for my story, it started in 2009 when my dad passed away. After that, my mom dedicated her life to help her mother. And all our efforts to bring them here to join the rest of the family failed because our mom, or my mom, needed or wanted to stay in her home where she spent all her life. But in 2015, when the Saudi coalition bombed the city of Sana'a, and one of the bombs hit very close to home, in fact, it broke some windows, we finally convinced our mom to leave Yemen in hope of coming here. And the only way then, being that the airport was closed, is through borders through Saudi Arabia. And we actually gone through the war and many different, as everybody could imagine, until they made it to the Saudi borders. But sadly, the first ban, even though it's not an American ban, it was a Saudi ban, it refused to allow my mom to go through Saudi Arabia and then eventually to a third country to come here. So we have to go back to Sana'a, and she spent another month in Sana'a while the bombing happening until the airport opened. And we eventually took her to Jordan, where she stayed 3 years in Jordan. 3 years in a different country with a different atmosphere. And one only could imagine the suffering. But after the Supreme Court decided to uphold the ban, my mom finally gave up. She said she no longer could handle the environment in Jordan, and she needed to go back to Yemen. And she actually went back to Yemen. And finally, we are able to convince her to leave again. And she's currently in Egypt waiting for any change. Like I said, this is my story, and every Yemeni home have a similar story. It's either with a mom or with a kid or with a wife, and I'm assuming you guys see how hard it is for our community. To finish, I'm gonna say this. The silver lining in this is we were able to motivate the community to stand up. Everybody knows that we went to many different events, and the community actually was very active in the election. And for us to continue to keep the community motivated, the circle of change need to continue. Every Yemeni American who stood up, who went to the protest, who went to Washington, who filed lawsuit, who spoke to media outlet, did that in hope of creating change. Yes, we were able to help this administration, or the Biden administration, make it, but we need tangibles that we could deliver back to the community. In 2008, the Democratic Party took over power. In 2010, they lost it. I believe the reason that they lost it is because the circle of change did not went back to the people who helped them gain power. And I hope, and I know for our community, the only way to keep them active and engaged is to have their pain elevated. So this is my story, and once again I want to thank Murad and the New York Coalition and everyone here for continuing to help us highlight the pain and hopefully deliver the hope for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, and thank you for sharing your story. The past 4 years have been incredibly difficult for immigrant communities across the state and the nation. And I am not trying to say like the light is at the end of the tunnel just yet, because we need to continue to hold every administration accountable for delivering for our communities. But I do hope that we will see the rescission of these anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim and African policies, to be buried with the previous administration. I'd like to thank you for being here, Zaid. I'd like to introduce and kick it over to Karin Anderson Ponzer, the Director of Legal Services at NeighborsLink, one of our great Westchester members, to touch upon the needs of immigrants serving on the front lines, as well as the digital divide for immigrant families in this moment.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Like Murad said, my name's Karin, and I'm with NeighborsLink. We're a community-based organization in Westchester. We've got locations in Mount Kisco, Ossining, and Yonkers. Our Workers Center, Family Center, and the Community Law Practice, where I'm the director, and the adult education programs provide workforce development, parenting programs, ESOL, and civics instruction in immigration legal services, from deportation defense to naturalization in Westchester and throughout the Hudson Valley. In normal times, we're serving over 4,000 people annually, providing these services. But during the pandemic, we expanded to help meet our community's most basic needs. We've been providing a combination of food, shelf-stable, hot meals, the gamut, health supplies, personal necessities that people need, and one-on-one support to people as they struggle in the pandemic, to over 3,000 individuals a week. And it's in addition to our usual programming, which we've now pivoted to provide remotely. Immigrants are on the front lines of this pandemic. They're overrepresented in the ranks of essential workers in the health industry, the food service industry, and the transportation sectors. In New York State, 31% of the foreign-born essential workers are foreign-born, approximately 2 million people. And these are the people who are risking their lives every day so others can work from home. They need to be fully included in pandemic relief. The most recent pandemic relief legislation does allow for the stimulus checks to go to mixed status families, which is a big improvement and long overdue. The benefit, the checks will now be provided to individuals for any household where one individual has a social security number, and will be retroactive. But those families who don't have an individual with who don't have a social security number, are still going to be excluded. Everybody should be covered in COVID relief packages. Our families need that support to recover. And immigrants need to not face barriers to vaccination. We need broad access to vaccination, and people should not have to be afraid of it. NeighborsLink is in the process of becoming a vaccination center. Initially, as you may know, the administration was requiring identifying information that could discourage immigrants from seeking vaccination. NeighborsLink was part of an effort, along with the governor, to eliminate that mandate. But we need to make sure that people feel safe and confident getting the vaccinations that they need to make themselves, their families, and everybody else safe. The immigrants, like everybody else, needs easy access to COVID testing. NeighborsLink is becoming a testing center in Westchester. In fact, we are a testing site today and tomorrow. We'll be participating on a rolling basis with other locations, but we need easy access to vaccination and testing. And immigrants need tech equity. The pandemic has revealed an enormous digital divide. The immigrant families have less access to Wi-Fi, to the tools and the technology they need, and the training they need to utilize technology. what we know from the pandemic is that the future is going to be more remote for the foreseeable future. And everybody needs to have access to Wi-Fi, and to the skills and the training and the tools they need to function in that world, from parents to students and to workers. NeighborsLink is working with school. We've really had to step up in ways that we never thought we would. We just are doing a whole new thing, working with school districts and families and students to make sure people can access Wi-Fi, whether it's at home, at one of our sites, and having our staff working with families one-on-one to make sure people understand the technology to interface with the school, to make sure they can help their children learn. And there's so many other really personal challenges that people face with technology, where you have multiple families living in a small space, or you have somebody who's providing childcare for income while they're trying to help support their child's remote instruction. So many very real challenges people are facing now, and we must have a well-funded commitment to digital equity. So it's going to be essential to our recovery. And it's definitely the immigrant New Yorkers who are so disproportionately represented, working as essential workers and suffering disproportionately the consequences of this pandemic, need and deserve that support. Last, but definitely not least, we need a rollback of current immigration policies like public charge that discourage immigrants from seeking the medical care they need. I mean, immigrant workers are the ones who are falling into the income brackets who will be penalized by public charge, limiting their ability to petition for family members. They deserve a lot better. We need an end to immigration enforcement and family separation. I mean, what we've been seeing throughout the course of the pandemic is that immigrant families that are on the front lines in the pandemic still, in addition to COVID, unemployment, everything, they're continuing to face the agony and indignity of family separation. It's got to stop. And we need comprehensive immigration reform. It's more urgent than ever. It's essential to our recovery. Immigrants have suffered disproportionately, have been vital to protect and feed everyone else during the pandemic, and their work and skills are integral to our economy. And their fate is ours. And we must honor and protect and stand in solidarity with immigrant New Yorkers. Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Thank you so much, Karen, and we appreciate all of the amazing work that NeighborsLink is doing, from direct services to legal services to fighting to ensure that everyone has access to the vaccine, and now becoming a vaccine distribution center. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to kick it over to Nyasa Hickey, Director of Immigration Initiatives at the Brooklyn Defender Services, to touch on some of the legal hurdles and regulations created by the Trump administration and how those policies have impacted the populations that BDS works with.
Thanks for your introduction, Murad. Brooklyn Defender Services is a public defender office in Brooklyn, New York, and we're also a universal representation deportation defense provider. The impact of enforcement policies at the federal level are felt every day by the immigrant clients and families that we work with. Directly after me, you're going to hear from a person who we represented, Edwin Teneo. He'll tell you firsthand about the horrors of the immigration detention system, fears of lifelong banishment, separation from his family, and the long-lasting impact of these harmful systems on individuals and families. The civil and human rights violations perpetrated by ICE against immigrants and people of color are long-standing and well-documented. Today, we call on Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, and President-elect Biden not just to undo the harms caused by the Trump administration over the past 4 years, but to prioritize and implement the following 4 changes. Number one, implement an immediate moratorium on enforcement and deportation and drastically slash the ICE and DHS budgets. Families live in terror every day of having ICE storm their homes early in the morning, tearing them away from family members, from the arms of their children, and locking them up in immigration detention centers, or deporting them seemingly overnight. This is inhumane, creates fear and distrust. Number two, end the use of immigration detention, private and otherwise. We have seen the horrors of immigration detention amplified under COVID-19 pandemic with the spread of the virus throughout detention centers, unsanitary conditions, and preventable deaths of people who are detained. Just right now, there's a hunger strike happening in the immigration detention jails. People are protesting the detention conditions and retaliation by ICE prison guards through a hunger strike. Recommendation number three, to provide universal access to counsel for immigrants facing deportation. In New York City, we are a provider of one of the first in the nation public defender program for detained immigrants facing deportation, the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project. This is a model for legal services provisions and is being replicated across the country in different jurisdictions. But it's really a program that needs to be provided on a federal level in all jurisdictions universally to all immigrants, no carve-outs. And number four, to disentangle the criminal legal system from the immigration legal system. We cannot revert back to an enforcement regime of prioritizing felons, not families, which resulted in massive deportations, and it set the stage for many of the horrors that we saw in the last 4 years. Instead, we need to recognize that the criminal legal system is plagued with racism, disparate enforcement, and should never be, can never be, the benchmark to delineate who is deserving or undeserving. The criminal legal system, with all of its injustices, should no longer be a feeder to the immigration deportation system. Rather, the immigration system must focus on family unity and recognize the humanity of all individuals. The harms of the immigration deportation system apply to agencies beyond ICE. Our policy recommendations are steps towards an ultimate necessary goal of abolishing ICE, but really we call on this government to consider a complete overhaul of the current immigration system. The United States needs a fundamental transformation of the immigration system to one that recognizes the humanity of all people and upholds the values of equal justice and due process for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyasa. And thank you for sharing the impacts that we've seen happen on the ground and in the courthouses as well as in detention. Next up, I'd like to bring up Edwin Teneo, a fellow with the New Sanctuary Coalition, to touch on his personal experience and why BDS and legal services were so vital to him.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edwin Teneo. I'm originally from Dominican Republic. I've been in New York since I was 3 years old. I grew up in Corona, Queens. I'm 30 years old now, a husband and a father to 2 beautiful daughters. Back in 2019, I was on my way to work when my wife got a phone call from ICE looking for me. I was confused and nervous to why they were there looking for me. I spoke with an ICE officer who said he would give me a few days to turn myself in. If not, they will put a felony warrant out for my arrest. I remember the day when I turned myself in one of the worst moments of my life. I ended up being put in Hudson County Correctional Immigration Jail for 13 months. Immigration detention was horrible. I was solitated and separated away from my wife and children. The conditions there were unsafe and unsanitary, and we were treated unfairly and criminalized simply because of where we were born. Things got even worse when the pandemic hit. In no way they kept us safe or informed us about COVID that was spreading rapidly. We all were terrified that we would get sick. We decided to start a hunger strike to protest the way we were being mistreated and demanded that ICE would release us. They didn't care if we lived or died. I didn't eat for 3 days. One day during the hunger strike, one of my friends in detention told me to get my things packed up. My wife was on her way to pick me up. It felt like a dream. I pinched myself to make sure it was really happening. My attorney had filed a motion that succeeded and allowed me to be released from detention. Reuniting with my family felt like a dream come true. It was very emotional and overwhelming. Overall, I was happy that I was home. Being back to the world during COVID was a real struggle and continues to be. It was hard to find work. I could not get unemployment. I could not get health or dental insurance and many other things that I needed to help me and my family get by. Based on my experience in detention, I had the blessings to become part of the New Sanctuary Coalition, a nonprofit organization that helps immigrants in and out of detention and across the country. Being able to give back to my community feels amazing. Giving back to my peers who went through the same things I had been through. I feel like I'm making a mark on this earth by helping someone else. This immigration system has done so much harm to so many people living in this country. With the new president, we need to make sure that no one goes through this again. No one should be detained in immigration detention. People are held in jails with terrible conditions for months or even years simply because of where they were born. Ultimately, we need to abolish ICE. ICE has torn our cities, communities, and families apart by putting fear into our community, terrorizing our immigrants' neighbors, and locking people away and deporting them from their families. Biden administration wants to stop ICE enforcement and detention and give people the opportunity to live here legally with equal rights. I humbly thank every organization, including New Immigration Coalition, New Sanctuary Coalition, and Brooklyn Defender Services, that has made a change in our community by helping families reunite, stopping family separation, and fighting for immigrants in New York and across the country. It's so important that we are able to have free lawyers because families do not have the money or the resources to pay for them. With the help of my attorney, Nabila Taj, and Sam Barr from Brooklyn Defender Services, I was able to be freed from detention and now obtain my green card. When we all work together, we can accomplish real change. Todos unidos es la llave. Sí se puede. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for sharing your amazing story. And thank you for the work that you're doing with the New Sanctuary Coalition and with Brooklyn Defender Services. We really appreciate it and continue to fight on because there's so many more folks who need the help. And we're all here to continue that fight. Hopefully we won't need to continue fighting, but the goal is to get everyone to a place where they can live in dignity and thrive as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to bring up Carmen Maquilon, the legal counsel director, the director of Immigration and Refugee Services, excuse me, at Catholic Charities of Long Island. Carmen's also a board member of the New York Immigration Coalition, and I'd like for us to bring her up to touch on some of the issues immigrants are facing out on Long Island.
Thank you, Murad, for the introduction. And again, I am Carmen Maquilon from Catholic Charities of Long Island. I am the director of Immigration and Refugee Services. Some of the asks that we will have for the new administration is number one is the comprehensive immigration reform for us. And I know that is to dream big, but we have to dream big in order to accomplish something. Our community has been living without any kind of legal protection for just too long. Families, it is bad when you have to bring up your family without setting up any roots. Where do you really belong when you cannot even claim any legal status in the country where you have lived for so many years and your children are being born? Another one is to reinstate the refugee program. And I will explain to you how it affects us. When the changes at this administration to the refugee program, it wasn't just to lower the number of refugees, but also to close refugee programs, because it is very difficult to rebuild a refugee program. Once an office is closed, it is extremely difficult to reopen. So that's what they wanted to do, to not just diminish the number, but to make sure that even if those numbers would increase in the future, that there will be no immediate benefit to the refugees because there will be no office to provide the services. So this not only affected the refugees that were coming to the United States, to New York, to Long Island, also the the special immigrants who are the translators and the interpreters for the U.S. Armed Forces, but it also affects our TPS population. It affects our unaccompanied minor population. How? Long Island, especially the 2nd Congressional District, is home to one of the largest TPS populations in the country. Unaccompanied minors, Catholic charities, and especially, we have been providing services to unaccompanied minors for more than 15 years. Unaccompanied minors, Long Island is home to one of the largest numbers of unaccompanied minors in the United States, certainly in New York State, but we are like the 3rd largest receiver of unaccompanied minors. Why do you think? Well, because we are also home to one of the largest TPS populations within the 2nd Congressional District. Okay, so these children, many of them are the children of these TPS holders. Unaccompanied minors were given under the previous administration, the Obama administration, a way to immigrate legally to the United States as refugees under the Central American program. When the refugee program closed, so did the Central American minors program close. Again, closing the doors to any kind of immigration remedy that the children could receive, and at the same time, the parents could receive from the refugee program. So by not having this refugee program, it affects our TPS, who are the parents of these children, and also any way of legal remedy under the Central American Minors Protection. In addition, by not having our TPS program as being parents of these Central American minors, there were also remedies were given to them, which now has been eliminated. So it is so important to have the refugee program reinstated, not just for the regular refugee population, but how it affects those that are already in the United States, and especially on Long Island. The DACA population is large, and we want this to continue and to be expanded. Many kids are who became of age to participate on the DACA program are now able to benefit, especially if it's extended. I would also like to mention that under the TPS and the asylum laws, the new asylum laws, the new elimination of asylum and who can qualify or who can benefit for the asylum, it affects directly our undocumented population, and especially our unaccompanied minors. Second, also our TPS population, more and more benefits are being cut. Now, for many of them, being unable to adjust status under, again, new cuts that this administration has done to the program. So the Biden administration needs to address not only at the bigger part of it, but also at the immigration level, at the immigration court level, because they really did a disservice and continues to do a disservice to the immigrant population, which affects all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carmen. And thank you for sharing the impacts on refugee communities as well as and unaccompanied minors out on Long Island. This brings us to the end of our program. Just to recap some of our top demands to the incoming Biden administration, as well as the new Senate majority leader, as well as Congress. We're not waiting for 10 more years. We need them to take action today. We need them to rescind the Muslim and African ban, as well as other travel bans immediately, and restore the U.S. refugee program. Issue an immediate moratorium on all enforcement, including deportations, detentions, and arrests. reinstate and expand DACA and TPS, and create a broad and expansive road for citizenship for the 11 million people who are currently without status in the United States. Thank you for joining us. We're going to open it up for questions. And if any reporter has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll be more than happy to get it answered. All right, we have a question for Vanessa Luna. The question is from Maria Smith at New York One Noticias. And she wants to know if the question can be done in Spanish. I believe so, so that's fine. The question's in the chat, Vanessa.
Gracias por la pregunta, María. Es muy importante saber de que DACA tiene un impacto no solamente en personas que son jóvenes, pero también en las personas en una familia y también personas en todas las partes de las escuelas. Entonces, es importante saber de que las nuevas aplicaciones de DACA sí va a impactar a jóvenes, pero también hay personas que tienen DACA, que también están o tienen hijos en las escuelas también, o maestros que ahora son parte de nuestras escuelas, que ellos también tienen DACA. Es muy importante saber de que con DACA uno recibe un permiso de trabajo de 2 años que pueden tener acceso ahora a trabajar legalmente, y también recibe la protección de no ser deportada cuando tiene ese permiso de trabajo. Entonces, eso puede cambiar la manera que tú vives tu vida, ¿verdad? Puedes tener acceso a diferentes recursos, también puedes trabajar en una manera de que antes no podías hacerlo, especialmente para jóvenes que están en la escuela, por ejemplo, si ellos tienen acceso a diferentes programas que ahora pueden tener acceso porque tienen ese número de social que viene con DACA. Y también es importante saber que las separaciones que pasen en la familia con las familias inmigrantes no solamente pueden pasar en la frontera, pero también pasan en sitios como Nueva York. Entonces, cuando uno puede tener la protección de asegurarse que puede estar en este país, eso puede ayudar a muchos jóvenes, pero también a familias inmigrantes que se sientan un poquito más seguros de que ellos están bienvenidos y pueden estar aquí y pueden seguir contribuyendo a la comunidad acá en Nueva York. Es muy importante no solamente seguir eso, pero asegurarnos de que este programa crezca y que también haya alguna manera en que todos en la comunidad inmigrante tengan acceso a tipo de ayuda y tengan acceso a una manera de volverse ciudadanos, porque DACA solamente arregla algo por 2 años y es algo bien pequeño. Necesitamos algo que sería muchísimo más grande para toda la comunidad inmigrante en este país.
Thank you, Vanessa. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll make sure to answer. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate your, to the panelists and the speakers, thank you so much for sharing your stories, your work. And I know that these past 4 years have been incredibly challenging for our communities, but we were able to fight collectively. And while we couldn't win everything, we were able to be successful on a number of different fronts. So thank you so much for your hard work and commitment. And thank you to everyone who's attending to learn more. Have a good day.